The hangar smelled of oil, metal, and fear. Bright lights hung overhead, casting long shadows across the workers who stood silent, watching. In the center, a small alien woman was dragged forward, her body trembling, her thin blue skin marred with bruises and dried blood. Her chains rattled with every step, biting into her wrists and ankles. The overseers walked beside her, their boots clicking like judgment. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her mouth had been cruelly mutilated, her tongue removed for speaking what they called lies. Eli Carter, a human mechanic, was crouched under the massive hull of Ship 17, his hands greasy, his wrench resting beside him. Normally, he didn't notice the punishments. There were too many. Too much pain to see and survive. But something about this one held his gaze. Even broken, even silenced, her eyes spoke. They were not filled with fear alone. They were pleading, honest, desperate for someone to see her truth. This one lied, the overseer's voice boomed across the hangar. It carried a weight of authority meant to terrify. She claimed the engines were cursed. She claimed the ship would fail. Lies bring panic. Panic brings death. Liars must be punished. The alien woman didn't move. She only lowered her head, allowing the chains to drag her across the cold floor. Her eyes flickered toward Eli again, a spark of hope, a silent warning, a question. Will you listen? Eli felt a chill. Humans were meant to obey. Humans were weak. Humans were replaceable. Yet something inside him clenched. Maybe it was the injustice. Maybe it was the faint recognition that what they called lies might be truth. They threw her into the scrap bay, a dark, cold place where discarded machines and broken beings went to fade. It was a death sentence for many. She landed with a painful thud, chains rattling. Eli watched her for a moment, his heart pounding. He knew he should look away. Humans who involved themselves rarely survived long. But that night, curiosity and compassion fought his fear. He returned to the scrap bay, carrying a small canister of water and a tattered blanket. The alien woman lifted her head slowly, her eyes cautious, guarded. She tried to speak. Nothing came. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable. Then, trembling, she pressed her fingers to the floor and began to draw strange symbols, lines, arrows, shapes that twisted and looped in patterns Eli didn't understand at first. He knelt beside her, studying the drawings. The symbols looked like numbers, calculations, diagrams of coils and circuits. She pointed repeatedly to one specific pattern and mimed an explosion with her hands, her eyes wide, urgent. Eli's stomach twisted. The drawings weren't about fear or lies, they were warnings. His mind raced. Ship 17, the one he had been working on for weeks. The same ship the overseers claimed was safe. The symbols, the arrows, the curves, something was wrong, something very wrong. She was trying to tell him that the engines were dangerous, that failure could come, that lives could be lost. Eli swallowed hard. He glanced at the door, knowing the overseer's patrol would come through any minute. Still, he stayed. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He didn't need to. The urgency in her eyes, the shaking of her hands, the clarity of her drawings, they said enough. He had seen broken machines before. He had fixed engines no one else dared to touch, but never a living warning. Never someone punished for telling the truth. And now, for the first time, he felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. It was fear, not for himself, not yet, for her, for the truth, for what would happen if no one listened. Eli reached out, placing a hand gently on the alien's wrist. She flinched but didn't pull away. Her eyes locked with his. In that moment, no words were needed. A connection formed, fragile but real. A human and a silenced alien understanding each other without sound, bound by the same urgent truth. The hangar was quiet now, but outside, life went on. Overseers plotted, workers obeyed, and humans like Eli were expected to follow. Yet in this small scrap bay, amidst the cold metal and broken bodies, something stirred. A seed of defiance, a whisper of hope. Eli didn't know what he would do next. He only knew one thing. She had spoken the truth, and he would find a way to listen. Eli couldn't sleep that night. The image of her blue, bruised face haunted him. The chains, the silence, the look in her eyes, so full of truth and fear. He kept turning over the drawings in his mind, the strange symbols, the lines of the engine core, the way she mimed the explosion, the way she tried to speak but couldn't. The next day, when his shift ended, he made a decision he knew could get him killed. He returned to the scrap bay. The alien woman was huddled in a corner, her body weak, shaking from hunger and pain. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, a faint spark of hope fighting through exhaustion. She tried to speak again, opening her mouth, but nothing came. The words had been stolen, but not the message. Eli sat beside her, careful not to scare her. He pulled out his data pad and stylus. "I don't understand your language," he said softly, though she couldn't hear him. "Show me." Her fingers trembled as she reached toward the floor and began to draw again. This time, the shapes were more precise. Coils, pressure lines, curvature of metal beams, arrows pointing toward specific joints. She pressed her hand to the center of the diagram repeatedly and then made a small shaking gesture like a violent tremor. The warning was clear. The ship would break. If they launched it, it would explode. Eli felt his heart skip a beat. Ship 17 was scheduled to leave the dock in just 2 days. Hundreds of people would be aboard. The overseers, blind and cruel, would never believe an alien who had lost her tongue. But humans could act. Humans could choose. And right now, Eli felt the weight of that choice settle on his shoulders. He grabbed his wrench and climbed back up to the hull, pretending to inspect the engines as usual. In his mind, he replayed her warning over and over. Every diagram, every line, every trembling gesture. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't a lie. It was a map, a puzzle, a desperate plea to prevent disaster. That evening he returned with more tools, more supplies. He had started to study her drawings, comparing them with the schematics of Ship 17. Something was wrong, he realized, something very wrong. There were in the core housing tiny cracks almost invisible to scanners. She had seen them. She had known. She had tried to tell them, and they had cut out her tongue. Eli's hands shook as he crawled under the engine. The cracks were subtle but growing with every vibration. If ignored, if the ship launched in this condition, the result would be catastrophic. He couldn't stop the tremors in his own body as he traced the fracture with his fingers. The alien had been right. She had been telling the truth, and no one would have listened if he didn't act. He returned to her with a data pad filled with notes, sketches, and photos. He held it up so she could see. Her eyes widened with recognition, and she pressed her forehead to his in a gesture he barely understood, but somehow it spoke of gratitude, connection, and trust. A silent bond formed between them, fragile but unbreakable. Over the next hours, they worked together in quiet. She would point, he would check. She would gesture, he would record. Sometimes she would shake, exhausted and in pain, but still determined. Sometimes Eli would curse under his breath at the stubborn metal, the failing machinery, the cruelty of the overseers. But neither of them gave up. They were alone against a system that would rather see truth punished than danger avoided. Eli began to understand something he had never thought about before. Humans weren't always the strongest. They weren't the fastest, or the most feared. But humans could choose. They could see danger, understand it, and act even when everyone else laughed. And for the first time, he felt that choice pressing on him like a living thing. When the shift ended, he left reluctantly, but not without looking back. She pressed her fingers to the floor, drawing one last symbol, an explosion. It wasn't fear this time. It was a warning, a plea, a promise that she trusted him. And in his chest, Eli felt something ignite, a determination he had never known before. He didn't know how he would save the ship. He didn't know if he could convince anyone to listen. But he knew this. She had spoken the truth, and he would make sure someone heard it. No matter the cost, Eli couldn't stop thinking about her warning. Every night, every shift, every sound of metal scraping metal reminded him of the small, blue-skinned alien in the scrap bay. She had no tongue, no voice, but she had something far stronger, the truth. And the truth was burning in his mind like a warning siren. He returned to Ship 17 under the cover of the night. The hangar was quiet. Only the hum of engines and the distant drip of coolant filled the silence. He crawled under the hull, sliding between coils and panels, tracing the lines she had drawn. His hands were shaking, but he didn't stop. The fractures she had pointed to were subtle, almost invisible. Scanners could not detect them. Overseers would laugh at him if he tried to report this now. But human hands, careful and patient, could feel what machines could not. His fingers traced a tiny crack along the core housing. It was thinner than a hair, almost invisible, but it ran deep. He tapped it lightly, listening. A faint, hollow vibration answered. His stomach dropped. Eli knew immediately what it meant. If left unchecked, the fracture would grow under stress. The next hyperspace jump would magnify it. The housing would fail, the core would overheat, and the ship, Ship 17, would tear itself apart. Thousands of lives gone in seconds. He pressed his palms to the metal, leaning close. His heart pounded in his chest. She had tried to tell them. She had drawn it, mimed it, pleaded with her eyes, and they had punished her for it. They had stolen her voice. They had assumed the worst, punished the innocent, and almost let everyone die. Eli climbed out from under the hull, breathless and shaking. He could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. He looked at the scrap bay, at her, curled up and weak. She watched him with those wide, pleading eyes. No words, just truth. He could feel it in his bones. If he didn't act, there would be no one to tell her story, no one to stop the disaster. He ran his hands through his hair and made a decision. He would check everything, every panel, every coil, every weld. Overseers would call it foolish, rebellious, even dangerous. But humans, he realized, could act when others ignored danger. Humans could choose, and right now, choice meant life or death. For hours, he crawled into spaces no one had touched in decades. He checked pressure valves, measured heat expansion rates, traced wires. Every detail lined up with her diagrams. She had been right. Every calculation, every gesture, every trembling finger had led to the same conclusion. The ship was a time bomb waiting to happen. When he finally emerged, exhausted and cut from metal edges, he found her waiting. She had drawn more symbols on the floor, trying to tell him something new. He knelt beside her and followed her fingers. There, in the middle of the diagram, was a tiny loop pointing to a failing support strut, something he hadn't noticed before. The realization hit him like a hammer. The fracture was worse than he had feared. Eli looked into her eyes and pressed his hand gently against hers. She flinched but didn't pull away. He understood her gratitude, her trust, her fear. She had risked everything by speaking the truth. She had been silenced, punished, and abandoned, and yet she had not given up. He whispered, though she could not hear him, "I will fix this. I will save them. I will make them listen." And for the first time, he felt something stir inside him that he had never felt before. Courage. Not reckless courage. Not the kind that comes from strength or violence. Courage born from knowing the truth and refusing to ignore it. Courage born from humanity. Eli didn't know if he could stop the overseers or if they would even listen. But he knew he could save the ship if only he could act fast enough. She had shown him the way. She had been right all along, and now it was his turn to speak for her. He stood, wiping blood and sweat from his forehead. The hangar seemed darker somehow, filled with tension and dread. Yet in the shadows he saw hope. Hope that humans could be more than weak laborers, hope that someone would act when others turned away. She had trusted him. He would not betray that trust. And as he walked back to gather tools and plan his next move, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had told the truth. And because of her, a human would now do what no one else could. Listen, believe, and act. Eli had always known humans were weak in the eyes of others. Weak, small, easily ignored. And yet here he was, standing in the middle of the hangar, holding evidence that could save hundreds of lives. The in Ship 17's core housing, the diagrams the alien woman had drawn, the trembling gestures that had begged him to listen. All of it weighed on his hands, on his mind, on his chest. He approached the overseers, data pad in hand, nerves tight like stretched wires. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear of the ship, but with fear of their laughter. They were cruel and proud, convinced of their own wisdom. They would not believe him, and yet he had to try. "Ship 17 is unsafe," he said, voice shaking but firm. "There is a fracture in the core housing. It will fail under stress. People will die." The overseers laughed. Their boots clicked as they circled him like predators. "You are a human," one sneered. "Your mind is weak. Your senses are flawed. Perhaps your alien friend, your tongueless liar, has poisoned your thoughts." Eli's stomach churned. Anger, disbelief, and fear collided in his chest. He gritted his teeth and held up the diagrams. "Look at this. She drew it. She tried to warn you. She was punished for speaking the truth, but she was right." The overseers laughed again, louder this time. Some waved dismissively. Others shook their heads, calling him insane. "A human believes an alien? This is foolishness. The ship is ready. You are a weak voice among many. You will obey." Eli's hands trembled. His mind raced. They wouldn't listen. They would not believe. And yet the ship's engines hummed in the hangar, a silent countdown to disaster. Every second brought them closer to destruction. He could not leave. He could not ignore her warning. Not now. He ran back to the scrap bay. The alien woman was lying on the floor, exhausted, weak, and pale. Her eyes followed him, pleading again. He knelt beside her, showing her the reaction of the overseers. Her eyes widened, and she pressed her forehead against his in a silent gesture of desperation and trust. She wanted him to act. She wanted him to speak for her, to save those who couldn't understand her truth. Eli made a decision that would change everything. He began tampering with the ship's systems, small, precise adjustments that would delay the launch. He disconnected minor safety interlocks, rerouted power, and triggered emergency alarms. Each action was deliberate, careful, and dangerous. If caught, he would be beaten, jailed, or worse. But the cost of inaction, of letting the overseers' pride and cruelty dictate fate, was far greater. The alarms blared through the hangar. Lights flashed red, casting eerie shadows over the metal hulls. Overseers and guards rushed in, shouting orders. Eli stood in the middle of Ship 17's bay, hands raised, blood and sweat smeared across his face. "Stop! This ship is unsafe. It will explode." They grabbed him, dragging him across the floor, beating him with their fists and boots. Yet he did not scream. He did not falter. In his mind, he could still see the alien woman's eyes, her pleading gaze telling him, "Do not fail. Do not give up." Even as they restrained him, the ship's launch was delayed. The emergency protocols he had triggered were holding, just long enough for someone, anyone, to notice, for the truth to emerge, for the fracture to be seen. Eli's arms were raw, his body aching, but he didn't regret it. He had chosen to listen. He had chosen to act. He had chosen to believe her, even when the world told him not to. And in that small, terrifying act, he had become more than a weak human. He had become a protector. The alien woman watched him, silent but alive. Her eyes were fierce now, full of hope and gratitude. She had been silenced, punished, and beaten, but her truth had not died. Through him, it would live. Eli understood something then, something simple and terrifying. Humans were not the strongest. Humans were not the fastest. Humans were not the most feared. But humans could see. Humans could care. Humans could act when others turned away. And when a human chose to act, nothing, not even cruelty or power, could stop them. The hangar was chaos. Alarms screamed. Red lights flashed across the metal walls, reflecting in the eyes of overseers and workers alike. Eli Carter stood in the middle of it all, bruised, bleeding, but unbowed. Every breath burned, every movement a struggle, but he didn't stop. Ship 17's engines hummed with dangerous energy, ready to tear apart at any second. The fracture in the core housing waited like a silent predator. He glanced toward the scrap bay. The alien woman was watching him. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear, but also with trust. She pressed her fingers to the floor, tracing the pattern of the fracture once more. It was a silent plea, "Do not fail me, do not fail them." Eli swallowed hard. She had no voice, but he did, and he would use it. "This ship is unsafe," Eli shouted, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "It will explode if it launches. Hundreds of lives are at risk." Guards rushed toward him. Their fists were heavy, their boots brutal, but he stood firm. Humans were not strong, he reminded himself, but humans could be stubborn. Humans could act when others refused. He dug into the metal floor, jamming a clamp, flipping switches, rerouting power. Every action delayed the launch, every second a chance to save lives. One overseer grabbed his arm and shook him violently. "Stop this madness. You are a human. Obey." Eli met the overseer's gaze, unflinching. "Obedience won't save them. Truth will. Listen to me." His words fell on deaf ears, of course. They never listened. Humans were weak in the eyes of the overseers, but Eli had something stronger than fear. He had clarity. He had the alien woman's warning. He had knowledge of the fracture, and he had courage born of responsibility. Humans could choose, and he had chosen. More guards arrived, dragging him across the hangar. He was thrown to the ground, but he kept one hand on the control panel. Fingers trembling, he held the switches in place. Every mechanism he manipulated delayed the launch. Every movement was a defiance of authority. Every second was a lifeline. Through the chaos, he thought of the alien woman. Her tongue had been cut for speaking the truth. She had been silenced for honesty. Her eyes had begged him to act, to speak, to fight. He would not betray that trust. He could not. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, an independent audit drone arrived. It hovered above the hangar, scanning, calculating, and recording. The fracture in the core housing was detected. The readings were undeniable. The alarms intensified as the system recognized the danger. Overseers froze, faces pale, their confidence crumbling. Laughter and ridicule vanished. Fear replaced it. The human had been right. The alien had been right. Eli collapsed to his knees, gasping, bruised, and battered. Guards still tried to grab him, but he ignored them. He didn't need their obedience. He only needed the truth to be seen. The fracture was recorded. The evidence was irrefutable. Lives were saved. He crawled back to the scrap bay. The alien woman was weak, barely able to stand. Her eyes found his, and she pressed her forehead against his hand. No words, no voice, just gratitude, raw and pure, shining through her silence. Eli felt tears sting his eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of everything. The cruelty, the danger, the fear, and now, finally, the triumph of doing the right thing. Over the following hours, investigators traced erased records, punished warnings, and hidden reports. They uncovered the truth. The alien had spoken facts. She had been silenced for honesty. Overseers were held accountable. The dock was temporarily closed. Humans and aliens alike murmured among themselves, whispering about the human who had listened, who had risked everything, who had authority to save countless lives. Eli stayed beside her, holding her hand, silent in his exhaustion. She could not speak, but she could communicate, and she chose the simplest words first. "Thank you," she typed into the voice device now attached to her. The synthesized voice repeated the words aloud. "Thank you." Eli's chest tightened. Tears ran down his face freely now. Gratitude, relief, awe at the small, silenced alien who had trusted him, and pride in humanity, in the stubborn strength that came from caring and choosing, not from power or fear. He realized then what humans were truly capable of. Not strength, not weapons, not dominance, but the courage to act when others refused, to see danger when others ignored it, to protect the truth when it was punished. Humans were dangerous, not because of strength, but because they listened. And when a human chose to believe, they would fight for the truth, even against impossible odds. Eli looked at her, bruised and fragile but alive, and whispered, "We did it. We saved them." And for the first time, the alien smiled. A small, tired, victorious smile. The hangar was quiet now, almost empty, except for the hum of damaged machinery and the soft footsteps of investigators. Eli Carter sat on the floor, arms scraped and bruised, watching the alien woman as medical teams attended to her. Her blue skin was pale and her body shivered from exhaustion, but her eyes were alive, alive with something deeper than fear, relief, trust, and hope. The investigators moved carefully, scanning panels, checking logs, reviewing reports. They discovered erased warnings, hidden notes, old schematics that documented her calculations and concerns. Everything pointed to the same truth. The alien woman had been punished not for lying, but for speaking the truth. The overseers had ignored evidence, silenced warnings, and almost caused a disaster. Eli felt a weight lift from his chest and yet pressed down in a new way. He had acted, yes, he had authority, he had risked his life. But the truth alone could not undo what had been done. The alien's tongue was gone. The overseers had proven their cruelty. The injustice had been real, brutal, and irreversible. Medical teams fitted her with a voice device, a small, sleek instrument that translated her typed messages into words. She tested it hesitantly at first. A word came out trembling and strange, "Hello." She pressed again, "Thank you." Eli felt tears sting his eyes. The simplest words carried so much weight: gratitude, recognition, relief. She had survived. She had not been silenced forever, and it was because of a human who had chosen to listen. The story began to spread. Whispers traveled across docks, spaceports, and star stations. Alien workers who had feared speaking out found courage. Humans who had once felt small and powerless realized the same truth Eli had felt. Listening mattered. Action mattered. The universe was dangerous, cruel, and unfair, but humans could make a difference. Overseers were arrested, dock operations were halted, and investigations extended to other facilities. Reports of silenced alien workers surfaced, documenting decades of abuse. Many were shocked, some sympathetic, others angry, but all had to confront the fact that a human had risked everything to act where their leaders would not. Eli spent hours beside her, holding her hand, helping her adjust to the device, interpreting her gestures. She typed words slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Each sentence revealed intelligence, clarity, and courage. She had been punished for honesty, but she refused to be broken. Every word she spoke through the device carried her truth into the world, amplified by the human who had believed her. He realized something profound that night. Humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most feared. But humans had a stubbornness, a courage, a refusal to turn away from truth, and when combined with empathy, with care, with listening, humans could become unstoppable. A single human could change the course of thousands of lives, prevent disaster, and restore justice. The alien woman looked at him, her eyes fierce and grateful. She typed slowly, deliberately, "You saved us." Eli's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to reassure her, to say it was nothing, but it was everything. It was a choice he had made, a risk he had taken, a declaration of human courage. As the medical team left, she pressed her hand to his cheek in a gesture of trust and gratitude. No words were needed. The bond between them was deeper than speech. It was proof of what humans could do, see, understand, and act when no one else would. And the lesson traveled far beyond the hangar. Across systems, and aliens whispered about humans, not as weak laborers, not as unimportant species, but as beings who could listen, who could act against cruelty, who could protect truth at all costs. Humans were dangerous in a way others could not predict, not because of weapons or power, but because of conscience. Eli sat beside her in the quiet, exhausted but alive, and he knew that this moment, this choice, this act of courage was more than a victory. It was proof. Proof that humans, small and fragile as they might seem, could stand against injustice, could protect life, could amplify voices silenced by cruelty, could be heroes not through strength but through heart, care, and determination. She looked at him one last time that night, eyes shining, and typed, "Human strong." Eli smiled through his exhaustion. He had never felt stronger in his life. Eli Carter stood on the observation deck, looking down at Ship 17. The engines were quiet now, silent and safe. The hangar was empty except for investigators and repair crews, moving carefully, checking every detail. He was bruised, cut, and exhausted, but alive. Beside him, the alien woman adjusted the small voice device strapped to her chest. She no longer needed to draw her warnings. She had words again, fragile but powerful. She typed slowly, "We are safe." Eli smiled, though fatigue weighed on his shoulders. He had done his job, yes, but the truth, the courage, had come from listening, from acting when no one else would. She had shown him the danger. She had trusted him with her silence, her drawings, her eyes, and he had chosen to believe. Across the station, word of what had happened spread quickly. Alien workers whispered about the human who had overseers. Some laughed in disbelief, others shook their heads, marveling. Humans had always been underestimated, dismissed, treated as small, fragile, weak. Yet here was proof. A human had acted when no one else dared. A human had saved hundreds of lives by refusing to ignore the truth. The alien woman typed again, "Human, listen, strong." Eli nodded, his chest tightening. She did not mean muscles or weapons. She meant something far more dangerous: determination, courage, and conscience. Humans could act in ways others would not, could care when others turned away, could see and believe when cruelty had silenced truth. That was what made humans dangerous. That was what made humans remarkable. He remembered her eyes in the scrap bay, pleading, begging silently. He remembered the lines she drew, the trembling gestures that had warned him. He remembered the overseers' laughter, their cruelty, their confidence in their own authority. And he remembered his choice, to act, to intervene, to defy. He looked at her again. She smiled, small but full of pride. She typed, "You saved me, saved them." Eli felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same. But he knew the truth. Not anyone would have. Not any human would have risked their life, faced authority, ignored fear, and fought for a voice silenced by injustice. That was not weakness. That was humanity. Investigators finished their work. Overseers were arrested, their power broken. Ship 17 was repaired, reinforced, made safe. The alien woman's warnings, once ignored and punished, had become the foundation of new safety protocols. She had been silenced, mutilated for telling the truth, but now her voice mattered. And it mattered because a human had listened. Eli placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, eyes shining, voice device beeping as she typed one final message: "Thank you, human." He smiled through his fatigue, looking out across the station. In that moment, he realized something larger, something universal. Humans were not the fastest, the strongest, the most feared. They were stubborn. They were brave when no one else was. They could care deeply, act decisively, and protect truth even when it was inconvenient or dangerous. Humans could be heroes not because of power, but because of heart. Word spread across the galaxy. Humans listened. Humans acted. Humans saved lives when others ignored warnings. And slowly, in whispers across docking bays and alien colonies, a new saying began to circulate. Humans are dangerous. Not because they fight harder or rule stronger. Because they listen. And when they believe, they will burn empires to protect truth. Eli looked at the alien woman one last time before leaving the hangar. She pressed her hand against his arm in silent gratitude. No words were needed. The bond was deeper than speech. It was proof of courage, proof of conscience, proof of humanity at its finest. He took a deep breath, standing tall despite exhaustion and pain. For the first time, he understood what humans were truly capable of. Not dominance, not fear, not raw strength, but the power of care, the courage to act, and the willingness to protect what was right, no matter the cost. And somewhere deep in his chest, he felt pride. Simple, quiet, unshakable pride in being human. He whispered, though she couldn't hear, "Humanity, fuck yeah." And across the station, across the galaxy, the story of a silenced alien and a stubborn human spread. It became legend. Proof that even the smallest, weakest voice could change the fate of many if a human chose to listen.